Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Pavel Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Lena Herzog?
Hello, Paul.
Hello,
I'm
Lena.
here.
Hello, Lena. This is Paul calling. As you know, I'm so delighted that you're part of the Quarantine Tapes.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right in this endless storm. It's just incredible what we're living through.
Yes.
But here we are. So, Lena, what have you been up to for the last 5 months or so of this incredibly long and unending quarantine?
What I have been up to have been quite pleasant and interesting and lovely. I work every day in my darkroom and in my studio. I get up, I read a lot, and then I go for a long walk in the forest or in a canyon or around the mountain, think about it, what I've read. I go back to my studio, my darkroom, and I work. And I work in my garden. But seems like, I don't know, every day I fall into some sort of a chasm between this private idyll and being utterly unmoored from the world and despondent at what you see going on, you know.
There's so many roads I'd like to take, and one of them is, I would, maybe I'll just ask you, you use that word unmoored, and I'm just wondering what unmoors you in particular.
Well, it seems like things that you always had suspicions about, you worried about and wondered, now seem to be revealed so apparently in the world that somehow, to rephrase, the famous saying by John de Dion, the center doesn't hold. I have a feeling that some of the basic notions no longer hold.
Were we not paying attention?
I think it was too worrisome to pay attention. And I think that the language has been captured and owned by the system that is really good about this. It's really good at it, at interpretations and explanations. And so all of a sudden we see, a debt of the United States that's larger than the GDP or the worth of the country. Is this a debt anymore? Society means that there's trust between individuals and institutions. Is there such a thing anymore? Is it expertise where it seems like everybody who has expertise, if you look them up, seem to be working for some corporations? Is that really expertise anymore? If our health is explained by pharma, if our worldview of the world is explained by people who work for think tanks that are bankrolled by military industries, and somehow trust is hard to come by. And then the wildest theory spring up. And so this vertiginous feeling, that's a sort of a difficult thing to manage. So I've been, but it's a wonderful place to be in a beautiful blooming garden with a man I love and the cat I love and all the books that ground me somehow. And I find that I've been reaching for voices and thoughts that used to comfort me before in moments like that. And then they help out with this vertigo of radical uncertainty. And so I don't feel like every day I fall into some sort of a chasm between the private idyll and things that are clearly going awry in the world. You know what I mean?
Clearly, I certainly do know what you mean. And you shared with me that you've been reading Montaigne now. And what does this moment, Lena, look like with Montaigne as your companion?
Yes, I started to read him mid-March because I had this, I felt that this was an emergency. And I always actually wondered why Nietzsche, Descartes, Blaise Pascal, and Emerson, Rousseau, Bacon, Zweig, Shakespeare, I mean, Steinman, they found in Montaigne something so vital, such different people. And I think that he had this unique equanimity, ability to manage uncertainty. He almost welcomed it as a chance, as an opportunity, you know. As Arundhati Roy calls COVID a portal.
Yes, indeed.
And he had this kind of an attitude. He used to love to say, "Que sais-je? What do I know?" And I kept wondering, why is it and how is it that he managed to be like that? I have a feeling.
Any clues? Any clues?
Yes, I have a theory about that.
I would expect nothing less from you.
Well, you know, I read Sarah Bakewell's biography on him, and I was fascinated to find out that he grew up speaking Périgord, this very small dialect language in Bordeaux where he was born. So until he was 3 or 4 years old, that was his language. The next language that he spoke was Latin. And with the best, his father was very keen on education, so he finds him the best tutor. So by the time Montaigne arrives to lycée, he actually is better educated than his tutors. So right there, from his childhood, he has this extraordinary authority and initiative in how he authors his ideas. And yet he is constantly open to more possibilities. Now, it is even more complicated by the fact, I mean, yes, he learns French, that as a young man, he works for a judge for whom he has to write briefs for the accuser and the accused every day. So he goes through this Rashomon exercise daily. Then his life changes a few times, and he late in life decides to read, to write. He reads all his life, but he starts to write. And right at the moment when he resolves to write, he is assigned to be the mayor of Bordeaux. And it's a very interesting kind of a comical incident because Paris really wants him to head that region of Bordeaux. And he doesn't want to because he wants to write at the moment. So he flees Bordeaux. He tries to escape this political appointment. And he can't. This is his duty. They find him. They essentially chain him to the post. And lo and behold, it is under his mayorship that the region has some semblance of peace. Because before him and after him, they don't. And I can't help but think that ability for him that he acquired as a child, as a young man, to constantly travel, so to speak, through the looking glass, to see the other side, that he manages this. And somehow just reading him gives a solace, I found, that is quite amazing, quite unparalleled. And yet at the same time, there's a fundamental reconsideration of basic notions from mundane. You know, he loves to write about wine, he loves about child rearing, about the plague, about, does his cat have a soul? To mega notions of power. So his book is actually incredibly absorbing, but also dangerous. And the part where you read, and not all editions have this summary, well, actually the essay by his friend who dies from the plague, Etienne Le Boissy. When you read that part, which is part of the essays of Montaigne, it kind of burns through your fingers. It's 16th century, but it reads as fresh as paint, and it's just extraordinary to see that, to to feel that, and you can understand why the book was forbidden, because it really challenges the most basic notions of power.
So is that where you find it dangerous?
Well, I think power found it dangerous. I find it reassuring because I find that we are at a moment of sort of reconsideration where basic notions have to be reconsidered, reflushed with meaning. In Imperial China, when a new dynasty arrived to the scene at the seat of power, they had a ritual. They performed a ritual that they called the rectification of names, because what they believed was that the reason that the previous dynasty failed, that were killed, assassinated, that they lost their power, was because the reality and the names that they had for it no longer corresponded. And I genuinely feel that is the case. John Berger has one of his last monologues before he died. He called the world as a prison with no outside, and said that ignore the jailers' talk. Words they speak no longer are useful for thought. And I find that to be, again, a point from which you can depart and reconsider things and see things clearly, because actually I think a lot of them are staring in the face. And the pandemic, they tend to reveal the truth. It's just that I think the truths are so enormous that we can't handle them. I think it's the kind of we run out of words, we run out of ways to say. But what is in between the reality and us are our old notions, our worn out words and worn out images. So it's like, for example, take a look at the. My grandmother, my mom's mother, was a doctor. And she started out as a young woman out of the medical school in the end of 1930s as an epidemiologist. And she was sent to the Far East in the USSR, in Siberia, to fight scurvy. And she was sworn to secrecy because by that time, Soviet Union was supposed to be just about near to be a paradise for all, and a paradise for all could not hold scurvy, the disease of poverty. I mean, look at what the pandemic has revealed. After the pandemic, we had $750 billion directed towards military budget.
Yeah,
it's an extraordinary amount of money.
Yeah, by any measure. But Montaigne has not been the only source of inspiration, as it were. You mentioned to me that you were reading Pavel Florensky. Now, here, Lena,
yes,
you must tell me who Pavel and who Florensky is.
Pavel Florensky was a Russian Orthodox priest, a philosopher, a very great philosopher. He did not write that much. He wrote a book, a very slim volume, but he did not believe in what we now would call copyright. He felt that knowledge should be free. He also was an inspiration for, I would say, just about every important Russian writer, philosopher, and thinker of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Berdyaev, the mathematicians, the Moscow School of Mathematics, and the set theory that did groundbreaking work were affected by him. And as well as the first Russian cosmist like Nikolai Fedorov, who founded the school that ended up sending the first astronaut into space, Gagarin. So he's a unknown relatively in the West, not very well known, but better known in Russia, thinker. And he was a polymath, did a lot of great breakthrough in science, but more than anything, it was his moral thought that affected people, including Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, that actually, report how deeply they were affected by conversations with him.
And he had a big influence also, if I understand correctly, on your own recent project, Last Whispers.
Yes, yes.
How so? And maybe you can give our listeners a sense of how Pavel Florensky fits into that, and also what Last Whispers is in the context of Pavel Florensky.
There were two central notions to him. One was total unity. And so he had this, it's not sentimental New Age notion of the unity of souls and objects and spirit. It's a more complex one, and it has an ethical major component in it, and also a religious one, a profoundly religious one, a spiritual one. And in terms of how he affected my work, was his study on the reverse perspective. He believed that Russian icon painting, the best icon painters, used the reverse perspective. And he drew charts, geometric charts, of how Russian icon painters created an image in such a way that you felt enveloped into the world. So when you looked at the icon, which was in a frame, you felt that you stepped into that frame. And the idea, I mean, there are people, particularly recently, there's a resurgence of interest in him, and some art critics said it's probably parallel planes or open planes, more like, rather than reverse perspective. There's a debate about that, but that's not what he was about. He had an ambition for creative act. And that ambition of creative act to make it more lifelike, to create it so that you cannot deny its existence, and that you feel enveloped fully by it. Last Whispers, which is an oratorio for vanished voices, collapsing universes, and a falling tree, is a immersive installation which primary goal is to make the voices of extinct and endangered languages sound, and sound them in such a way that their existence will not be denied. It is devoted ostensibly to the mass extinction of languages and cultures, because we are losing...
Ostensibly.
It is ostensibly and fundamentally, but I think it has a sort of a larger goal of allowing a space within a 45-minute length of it, or the 7-minute version in virtual reality, that is perhaps one feels more attentive and expands the range of what one can hear and perceive.
Lena, are you still listening to these endangered voices in your dark room?
Yes.
Or are there other voices you're listening to now? And added to that question, if you're still listening to them as you seem to be,
yes,
do they sound to you different at this moment?
Yes.
How so?
They sound louder. They sound
louder. Tell me why.
Well, it probably has to do with the lack of noise in my own head, and that I'm quieter, that I'm more in one place, and the time has become more elastic, and it allows for this attentiveness, for this solidarity.
I mean, you speak beautifully about these endangered voices. You say, they remind me that despite the deafening noise of our own voices, we are floating on an ocean filled with the silence of others.
Yes.
And how can we listen to that silence?
Shut up.
All right. The floor is yours. And if you and if you believe that, you're in trouble.
Well, I mean, really, at least know that they're there. At least know that, and reach out for the hand. How John Berger, I know he's your favorite too.
He is.
How he said, silence is like a hand extended.
How do you understand that? It's so beautiful.
It's a possibility.
It's an invitation.
An opening.
Yeah.
An invitation.
I know that you started your life, so to speak, with a real passion for philology.
Yeah.
And as a young scholar, as Carlo Ginzburg reminds us, Nietzsche once wrote, "Philology is the art of slow reading."
Yes.
Do you agree with that? And if so, how so?
I must be a very good philologist because I am really slow. Because to really understand, especially when you are reading a demanding text, or not even a demanding, but a profound text, you have to absorb that, and that is not a hurrying matter. So, I think that's sort of how that is.
You've said that thinking about languages invariably leads you to fundamental questions. What are some of those fundamental questions that you're led to?
How do we know what we know? The basic sort of Socratic question. And I find that linguists, philologists, and by the way also war photographers are the least propagandized and brainwashed people I've ever met. And I think with the linguists and philologists, it has to do with the fact that you're constantly paying attention to the words and how they match up to meaning. And do they match to meanings anymore at all?
And they're not working within a monoculture.
That's right. And also, for the most part, linguists know a few languages. And the moment that you're traveling, just like you, Paul, yours is French, isn't it? Original language.
Mine is confused. I always say that I have many father tongues or many mother tongues, and who knows? Nothing that 10 years of therapy can't help.
And yes, and that's actually that opening and that possibility of going through the looking glass and back. But also, it's a very unmooring. It's a vertiginous feeling, for sure. It's not always pleasant, but it's, I think, a necessary one. And I think at this moment, we all have to grapple with these notions. Are these basic notions? Is it really that we have a society? Is it all just a kabuki theater?
Sometimes it feels that way. Lena, in closing, sadly, how sadly is that? I want to hear about your dream.
It's interesting that you said dream and not dreams. It's quite uncanny because there's a dream that I'm having repeatedly now since March. It's probably has to do with the fact that I keep thinking and running in the same sort of labyrinth of thought. And it's maybe telling me something I don't know. And sometimes I wake up in the middle of it, sometimes from the beginning. I dream that Vanna and I are on the beach, but it's not a populated beach. And it seems like it's in Africa, maybe Algiers. I seem to know it's Algiers, and it's probably because I also been reading Camus like everybody else, The Plague. Anyway, yes. But it's a very sort of a white beach. But what is interesting is that the water, the ocean, is at the 90 degrees to the beach itself, like an aquarium, except that there is no glass. Because that's just how things are now. Everything has changed. All perspectives have gotten inverted. And I see sharks or some giant predatory fish, and they are suckling wildly. And I yell to Vanna, do you see them? Are they afraid or are they in a feeding frenzy? And Vanna says, they may be both. And then I see this enormous shadow that's larger than the horizon that bursts out from the bottom of the sea and above the sharks. You realize that's what the sharks are afraid of. And then I yell to Vanna, are we ever going to see this? Are we ever going to see this? And Vanna, who has all the answers even in my dreams, says, maybe we shouldn't even see it. Maybe it's better. And I tell him, but I want to see it. I want to see it so badly. And we do see it, and it bails out of the water and on the shore. And I grab my cameras and I yell, Vanna, I don't have a lens for this. And I run up and down this monster, and it's enormous. And I'm taking these sections, these pictures of the sections of this whale or dragon or whatever that is. We don't really know. And it's breathing, and it seems to be saying something. And of course, I never hear in my dream what it says.
And Lena, is this dream you're saying since March? I imagine it repeats itself with variations.
Yes, it does. Sometimes I wake up just running up and down this black mass, and I'm touching it, and I'm trying to see what it is and figure it out, and I just can't see because it goes from horizon to horizon, and I can't figure it out. I can't take a picture of it. I can't understand it. Sometimes I don't see it bailed out. I just see a shadow coming from the bottom of the sea. But I always see the sharks feeding, in a feeding frenzy. And there's blood in the water. Sometimes there's blood in the water.
Well, on that note, Lena,
optimistic note.
on the note of blood on the water,
in the water,
could it be a better metaphor for our life just now? I have to say it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and I hope our listeners will do like you and essay the essays of Montaigne, and maybe discover Pavel Florensky and much else, and of course take a good listen to Last Whispers. It's been a real pleasure. Take good care and stay safe.
You too.
And continue dreaming. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.